talked about. The idea that the 8-game schedule is still in play is incredible to me.
Yeah,
for the SEC,
it's very recently
because that's the 1-7, and in this state, we know who the 1 is for State and Ole Miss. Means that, if you were a State fan, it's like, oh, we may end up with Alabama. Or if you're an Ole Miss fan, like, oh my gosh, we might get screwed and get Georgia. No, you got the Egg Bowl. That's all you got. That's every year. That would be big for these schools, and I think it allows you to keep your Power 5 games that you have in place. If you're Mississippi State, you don't want to be buying out Arizona State in a few years, or buying out Washington State or whoever and Ole Miss is playing Purdue and whoever they're playing. You don't want to buy those games out because you got 9 conference games. It allows you to keep those in place.
Yeah, or you just play the games.
Well, somebody's got to get bought out one way or the other. It may have to be an FCS school or a group of 5 school, but if you have 4 games scheduled, you got to get rid of one of them if you have a 9-game schedule.
So if the line of thinking is it's not done, but the hang up is more money and they're going to get more money to have non-conference games, my question is how much more? How much more? And here's why I ask that. Because while however many millions more will further separate you from the NC States of the world. But if you're Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, South Carolina, Missouri, would you rather have an additional conference game, which is more difficult for you to win, or $6 million, the same $6 million a year that Alabama is also getting? Like, it gets you no closer to the top of your league, but it gets you a more difficult schedule. And with the 12-team playoff coming, people say, well, it gives you more margin for error. Not Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri, Arkansas. No, it gives Alabama more margin for error. It's still extremely difficult for an Ole Miss and a Mississippi State to win enough games to make the 12-team playoff. In the college football playoff era, how many Ole Miss and State teams would have made the 12th team? Is it 3?
2 from Ole Miss and 1 from State? Or 3 from Ole Miss and 1 from State?
2 from Ole Miss, 1 from State.
Yeah, 2.
Well, I guess 3 because, the 14 team, they would have been in.
I don't think they would have, right? There's a weird deal with conference champions, and I think Ole Miss only would have made it twice. Either way. So we're talking about 4 times in 18 seasons of football. That's what we're talking about here. Because 9 for Ole Miss, 9 for State. So 18 seasons of football, the 2 teams here would have made the 12-team playoff 4 times. And you're about to vote to make your schedule more difficult. For what? How much money? And I would love to talk to Zach Selman or Keith Carter and say, how much money is the more difficult schedule worth to you?
Well, and so let's just play with the math for a second. If it's an additional $5 million a year times 16 teams, that's $80 million for a 10-year contract. So that's ESPN saying, yeah, we'll put another $800 million into the deal. If it's $10 million a year times 16 teams, that's $160 million. That's $1.6 billion additional. I don't know.
But you got to look at it at the school level.
But I do know that the revenue matters.
You got to look at it at the school level, because they're going to be looking at what's best for Mississippi State, what's best for Ole Miss. Is it that $10 million, or is it being able to schedule a non-conference game against a team we can pretty much beat and enhance our chances to be in the college football playoff?
Yeah, one fewer opportunity to get eliminated from the playoff.
And you have to think about it in terms of, you have 7 or however many games it is, 9 or 8. And you got a chance for it to be Vanderbilt, to be South Carolina, to be Missouri, a team you feel like you can beat most years, or at least it's a toss-up game. It's not always going to be Georgia and Alabama.
Right. I'd rather play Middle Tennessee State than South Carolina, though.
You have, I would even go for the Power 5. I'd rather play Arizona State than almost anybody in the South Carolina. I'd rather play Minnesota, who State plays in 3 years, than those teams.
But there's a problem right now because the majority of these home games are not Arizona State or Purdue or Minnesota.
Right.
they are Southeastern Louisiana,
right?
ULM, Furman,
but they're not getting rid
South
of those
Carolina
games.
State.
State and Ole Miss are not going to get rid of those games. They're going to get rid of the Power 5 games. Now. Well, it'll be 3 on a 9-game schedule.
So you're convinced that the SEC will do away with the Power 5 requirement if you go to a 9-game schedule?
I would think they would, because I mean it's about making bowl games. Yeah, they're going to be like, why would we? You picked up an extra Power 5 game. Why would you make them play 10? Now some schools are going to have to. Florida, South Carolina, Kentucky. They're going to have to. Georgia. They're going to have to because that's their in-state rival.
What if the network tells you have to?
Then if the network tells you, well, that's a different story. And then there's going to be some 5 and 7 years in Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Missouri, South Carolina, Arkansas.
I think it's a better product overall when you go to 9 games. It's better for the fans, right? We beat the drum all the time about how expensive it is.
It's better for the fans. 100%.
So if we're going to talk about how expensive it is and how hard it is and the in-game experience versus the at-home experience, I just think you got to look at this thing and go, okay, we got to do something that's better for the fans. In addition, and I mean, are we convinced that all of a sudden the SEC is not going to be winning national championships? I'm not.
I think so.
The 8 games versus the 9 games. And look, I think the truth of the matter with the SEC and the 14, soon to be 16 schools is that the question that you want answered is not yet answerable. They don't yet know how much more money for a 9th game. I think they're going to know soon. I mean, you heard Ross lay out spring meetings in Destin as, or shortly before, as kind of the timetable. And look, I know both of you were, dismiss is not the right word, but they'll do away with the Power 5 requirement.
Oh, I don't. That's not an opinion I share. I don't think.
Okay, that is not a slam dunk.
That makes it tough. Makes it tough for a lot of the teams in the league. But the problem is, like I said, you do have 4 teams who are just sort of they're stuck in that. They're not going to give up. Florida's not giving up Florida State.
And wouldn't you think that Florida and Georgia and South Carolina and who's the other one? Kentucky would say, hold on a second.
Yeah.
If we got to play a Power 5 every year, you guys should also.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of landmines they have to navigate there. So,
and because we had somebody text and say, I think Keith Carter and Zach Selman would take the 8-4 with that extra money over 9-3 without it. And a good reply, I think this is from Hey Dad. What if that 9-3 gets you to the playoff? That is, I'm so curious because that number is going to leak. I assume is how much more money they'd make. Is what do you value? Because you're right, and I agree, and I advocate for it. The fans, game day, all that stuff is getting more expensive. Now, it's cheaper to go to the bad non-conference games. The tickets are cheaper, stuff like that. If it's Texas instead of North Texas, that game day weekend becomes more expensive for you. And as just a consumer, if you never go to games, you sit on your couch, you'd rather have more games to consume. I agree with that. Like, I'm on that boat.
Yeah.
More attractive matchups are better as a consumer. But as a fan of your team, what do you want? Do you want an easier path to the playoff, or do you want Texas instead of North Texas on your schedule? Bad example because they're joining the league, but you get my point.
Right. The other thing to consider is, if you're talking about fans and, making it easier for them, is it easier to go on a road trip to Georgia or Florida, or is it easier to go on a road trip to Minnesota or Arizona? Where they're getting the car most days.
Yeah, I guess that does mean, there are a lot of people who would say, well, it's a trip to the airport regardless. But there are a lot of people who would say, no, I'm going to drive to Athens, or I'm going to drive to Gainesville.
We don't all have cross one just waiting on us there. Some of us just make the drive.
I didn't say Oxford International. I meant driving to the Memphis airport or driving to the Jackson airport or the Gulfport
Is it Oxford
airport.
International now? You got an international airport up there?
If you got a G550, it is. Yeah, that's the only way. You've never heard that before?
Oh. Ooh, my abs have gotten. Even fat people have abs, and mine have gotten a good workout today. I've laughed a lot.
Hey, so another thought on the financial piece of all of this. When you look at the Power 5 game and whether or not you keep that or not. So when Mississippi State, for example, plays a home-and-home with Arizona, at Tucson last year, Arizona comes to Starkville this year, right? That's just a home-and-home. That's not a guarantee game. When Mississippi State hosts Austin Peay, Western Kentucky, they've got to write them a check for somewhere between $1 million and $2 million. Mm-hmm. And so if you only have 2 of those games, as opposed to 3, you can decide what's most cost-effective as well. I mean, Scott Strickland was the one that kind of talked to us about this several years ago, and it led to the questions of, why are you playing a game in Mobile against South Alabama? Yeah. And it was like the 2-for-1 deal, and it was to limit the big payout by having 2 home games, but going to their place once, in a place where it's like, well, your fans can do that. And Ole Miss has got a game in Mobile in the future, right?
State has 2 games coming up. We've talked about this. They're at Troy and they're at Southern Miss, and those are both 1-for-1s.
Yeah. Who's going to win out in these discussions, right? Is it going to be ADs and presidents or coaches?
It's going to be whatever Alabama and Georgia want. If they ever come to a consensus, that's what the rest of us will get.
With all due respect to Zach Arnett and Lane Kiffin, if I'm Zach Selman and Keith Carter, I couldn't care less about what my current football coach tells me to do. Especially,
hey, does your check clear once a month? Okay, I'll take care of the schedule. You just get your guys ready. Thanks.